Have you ever heard the phrase kids these days or asked, what's wrong with kids these days? If you're over 30, you've probably said that or thought it at some point. Dr. Leonard Sax, who is a MD and a trained psychologist, has sought to answer that question. And he doesn't go along the typical route that you think most people would go when they answer that question. He's written a really cool book called The Collapse of Parenting, How We Hurt Our Kids When We Treat Them Like Grown-ups. Let's take a look at that book now. What I really love about Dr. Sax's book is that he shifts from kind of the prevailing notion of parenting, which seems to be giving kids a tremendous power in terms of decision-making and independence and personal autonomy. He takes that and kind of balances that out and gives the authority back to the parents. It's almost as if he's, again, pushing back against this notion that parents are curmudgeons and to give them any type of rules or structure is hindering kids' independence and their creativity and their ability to express themselves. He really goes back to a traditional notion of parental authority and kids being underneath that authority. Now, before you start thinking, well, I've already got this book down and I don't need to read it, he's not saying that kids don't have opinions and that kids can't express themselves. Absolutely not. But I think what he's getting at is, have you ever been to perhaps a public place and you see a child, and I don't mean like a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old, like a mid-adolescent. I'm talking like a 7 or 8-year-old in a public place, maybe at the grocery store or in a restaurant, and get severely upset with their parents, yell at their parents in public with absolutely no shame, or even use profanity to their parents, and they kind of just shrug it off, and you're kind of sitting there going, what in the world did I just see? Or you see a parent pacifying a small child with a tablet or an iPhone, and you wonder what in the world is going on here. Dr. Sax really confronts these issues and goes at it from a medical point of view and from a psychological point of view. The drawback to this book is when you write a book about authority and parental rights being, primary, you get a little curmudgeon-y if you're not careful with your language. It got a little bit like that toward the end, but it wasn't overwhelming and it wasn't overbearing. He really did a good job of balancing those things out. So I think, for me, the best people to read this book are new parents. Parents who right now, may be pregnant or thinking about starting a family, and or maybe even have infants and toddlers. That is probably the best demographic for this book. I would highly recommend anybody who is starting a family, getting married, and all that good stuff to read that book as kind of like an introduction to how proper parenting should work with kids. I found it to be incredibly helpful. For me, because I have an 11-year-old and a soon-to-be 9-year-old in the house, and I found it extremely helpful for where my kids are, because he puts the problem with kids, as we would say it, kids these days, not on primarily social media. Okay, we would look to blame that or MTV or TV, like it was in my generation. He puts it squarely on parents, that parents have the right to turn those devices off, to not give their kids those accounts, to monitor those things, and that the development of your child and the exposure your child has to certain types of media and blah, 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 music, you get it, movies, is squarely on your shoulders as a parent. And for us to turn a generation, quote, around, it's not dealing with unruly kids, it's dealing with parents who don't know how to parent. And this is a great parenting primer for anyone, again, who is thinking about developing a family. So if you're out there and you're thinking about starting a family, you're newlywed, and you're thinking about going in that direction, I would highly recommend reading this book. Read it with a highlighter. It gives a lot of stats, and I'm not going to go into that. You can read that on your own. I just want to kind of pop this in here and let you know it's a pretty solid book, and I really appreciate it coming from his medical and his psychological background. Gives a lot of good references, a lot of good case studies to back up these points. So I'd highly recommend reading The Collapse of Parenting, How We Hurt our kids by treating them like grown-ups. You'll be a better parent for you did, and even if you don't agree with it, you'll be a better parent because you've read it and you understand the totality of the argument. This has been Steven with Cover to Cover. We'll see you again next time. Take care.